It didn't start with Netflix. It didn't start with streaming or Redbox or the internet. Those things accelerated what was already happening, but they didn't cause it. Blockbuster's collapse started the moment something invisible disappeared from its balance sheet. Something so quietly removed that almost nobody noticed it at the time. And by the time the damage became visible, it was already irreversible. To understand what disappeared, you have to understand what Blockbuster actually was at its peak. In 2004, Blockbuster operated approximately 9,000 stores worldwide. General Motors had factories. Walmart had distribution centers. Blockbuster had something different. It had the Friday night ritual. That specific feeling of walking through those doors, scanning the new release wall, holding two movies, and deciding which one made the cut. That was not just commerce. That was a cultural experience that an entire generation organized their weekends around. And behind that experience was a company that, at its core, was extraordinarily profitable. The late fee system alone generated revenues that kept thousands of locations running. The physical footprint was enormous, yes, but the cash flows that supported it were real. By every financial measure that mattered, Blockbuster in the early 2000s was not a company in crisis. It was a company at the apex of an industry it had built. That's what makes what happened next so striking. Because the collapse did not come from outside. It came from a single transaction that stripped Blockbuster of the one thing it needed to survive anything: financial flexibility. Here's what most people don't know about Blockbuster's final years. In 2004, Viacom, which had owned Blockbuster since 1994, decided to spin the company off as an independent entity. On the surface, it looked like freedom. Blockbuster was being released to stand on its own. What it actually meant was something entirely different. To fund the separation, Blockbuster was required to pay a special distribution of $5 per share to its stockholders, a total cash outflow of approximately $905 million. To cover that payment, the company entered into a new $1.15 billion credit agreement. In a single transaction, Blockbuster went from being a cash-generating subsidiary protected by one of the world's largest media conglomerates to a standalone company carrying nearly $1 billion in debt. This is the moment the collapse actually started. Not because debt is automatically fatal, but because of when this debt appeared. It arrived precisely as Netflix was beginning to prove that DVD by mail worked. It arrived precisely as Redbox was deploying kiosks in every Walmart parking lot. It arrived at the exact moment Blockbuster needed capital the most, to invest in servers, digital rights, and new infrastructure, and instead every strategic decision from that point forward had to be weighed against crushing interest payments and looming debt maturity schedules. The financial flexibility disappeared, and with it, quietly, went Blockbuster's ability to fight. But the damage did not stop there. 1 year later, in 2005, something else disappeared. Late fees had always been the engine under the hood of the Blockbuster model. Consumers hated them, but they accounted for roughly 16% of total revenue, the high-margin cash flow that made running 9,000 physical stores viable. When Blockbuster announced the No Late Fees program, it felt like a consumer victory. What it actually was a $200 million annual hole punched directly into the operating budget of a company already staggering under $1 billion in debt. Former Chief Executive Officer John Antioco was direct about it. The removal of late fees cost the company approximately $200 million in annual profit, on top of the $200 million already being invested to launch Blockbuster Online. That is $400 million gone from a company whose entire financial structure depended on high-margin revenue to justify the overhead of a massive physical footprint. For 2005, Blockbuster reported a net loss of $583.9 million. That number tells you everything. The company was not collapsing because customers did not want movies. Customers still wanted movies. It was collapsing because the revenue that had always covered the cost of delivering those movies had quietly, deliberately been removed. And yet, and this is the part of the story that genuinely haunts you if you follow it closely enough, there was a moment where Blockbuster almost won. Between 2006 and 2007, the company launched Total Access. The program allowed customers to rent movies online and exchange them for free in-store rentals. It was a hybrid model that Netflix, operating purely by mail, could not match. You could order online. You could swap in person. You had the convenience of digital and the immediacy of physical in the same subscription. In the first quarter of 2007, Blockbuster signed up 780,000 new subscribers. Netflix added only 480,000 in the same period. Netflix actually lost approximately 55,000 subscribers in the second quarter of that year, the first net loss in the company's history as a direct result of Blockbuster's push. They were winning. Then the momentum disappeared. Total Access was expensive. Every in-store exchange cost the company roughly $2 in potential rental revenue and overhead. Activist investor Carl Icahn focused on the immediate debt obligations and short-term margins, pushed back against continued investment in subscriber growth. The resulting leadership change in July 2007 brought in Jim Keyes, who shifted the company's priority from aggressive digital expansion to optimizing profitability. The Total Access program was scaled back. Its competitive edge was dulled. Netflix caught its breath, stabilized its pricing, and pivoted toward streaming. The window closed, and it never reopened. But even after all of that, the debt, the lost late fees, the abandoned momentum, Blockbuster was still operating, still stocking shelves, still serving customers. What delivered the final blow was something most business histories barely mention. For decades, movie studios had extended Blockbuster 90-day credit terms. This was standard in the industry. Blockbuster would stock its shelves with new releases, generate the rental revenue during the opening weeks when demand peaked, and then pay the studios after the cash had already come in. It was a working capital model that made operating thousands of locations financially possible. As Blockbuster's financial health deteriorated through 2008, the studios, Viacom, Warner, and Sony, grew nervous. Then, as the global financial crisis began to unfold following the collapse of Lehman Brothers in September 2008, the studios made their move. They shifted from 90-day credit terms to cash on delivery. Almost overnight, the working capital that had sustained Blockbuster's inventory model disappeared. Think about what that actually means in practice. The Blockbuster model depended on having hundreds of copies of a new release available on opening weekend. That was the experience customers were paying for, the certainty that the movie they wanted would be there when they arrived. When credit disappeared, stores could no longer afford to stock that volume. New releases were checked out before Friday night ended. Customers started leaving empty-handed. And those customers, the ones who had stayed loyal through the late fee controversy, through the quality decline, through everything, quietly started making different choices. Some found Redbox, some finally tried Netflix, some just stopped going. By late 2008, Keyes had been working to rebuild EBITDA and was positioning for a debt refinancing that could have cleared the path forward. Moody's had upgraded the company's debt rating in anticipation, but approximately $300 million of Blockbuster's debt was due for repayment in 2009, and the post-Lehman credit markets were simply closed to distressed retailers. The refinancing window disappeared alongside everything else. In 2010, Blockbuster filed for Chapter 11 with over $1 billion in debt. Dish Network acquired what remained. By 2013, every corporate location had closed. What you are left with, when you trace the entire arc, is something more complicated and more instructive than a simple story about a company that ignored Netflix. Blockbuster's collapse was a cascade of disappearances. Financial autonomy disappeared in 2004 when Viacom loaded the company with debt. Revenue margin disappeared in 2005 when late fees were eliminated. Strategic momentum disappeared in 2007 when total access was gutted. Inventory credit disappeared in 2008 when the studios lost confidence. Market liquidity disappeared that same year when Lehman collapsed and refinancing became impossible. Each disappearance made the next one worse. Each one narrowed the options available to whoever was in the room making decisions. By the time streaming became dominant, the company did not have the infrastructure, the cash, or the time to respond. It was not that they failed to see what was coming. It was that the tools needed to meet it had already been taken away. The Friday night ritual did not end because people stopped wanting it. It ended because the financial foundation that made it possible had been quietly hollowed out, one disappearance at a time. That is the part of the story worth remembering. Not that a great company lost to a better competitor, but that a company with every advantage, the brand, the customers, the distribution, the cultural presence, was made structurally unable to fight before the real battle even began.